Aaron Sibarium is an associate editor at the Washington Free Beacon, is reporting on this subject this week. Aaron, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Uh, Give us the comparison here. What happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, and what's happening now?
Sure. So I think the most instructive comparison is to look at what Deutsche Bank, the famous German bank, did after Ukraine and after Hamas's massacre in Israel. The same day that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, Deutsche Bank, which some viewers may know helped to expropriate Jewish businesses during the Holocaust, issued a statement saying, of course, we condemn this invasion. We're very concerned about the unprecedented land war in Europe, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. It took 5 days and an inquiry from me for this same bank to say anything about Hamas is butchering innocent Israeli civilians. The statement they gave me was, unequivocal in condemning terrorism, but kind of equivocal in terms of laying the blame. It did not specify Hamas or specify that the victims were Israeli. And that basic pattern is what you're seeing throughout the corporate world, where a lot of places either have not issued statements yet, or they've issued them somewhat belatedly and half-heartedly, especially when compared to how they reacted to both Ukraine, but also George Floyd and Black Lives Matter.
So I would prefer to live in a world where these corporate entities don't release statements on issues related to war, geopolitics, or literally anything that's outside of the realm of their business. But they kind of set the rules already, haven't they, Aaron Sibarium? They've decided to release statements with full-throated endorsements for all sorts of left-wing and destructive causes. But the second Hamas commits a terror attack on Israel and shocks the world, they're bizarrely silent.
Yeah, exactly. And it's even worse at universities, which, as I'm sure you saw, initially issued these really, really mealy-mouthed statements if they said anything at all. And then some of them got pummeled enough that they did eventually say something slightly stronger. But, look, in my ideal world, just like you, I don't want universities or corporations or almost any institution to weigh in on most of these issues. I don't frankly think that, Harvard and Northwestern don't need to take sides in the broader Israel-Palestine conflict. That's not really their job. But when there's a mass terrorist attack that kills 1,300 people in Israel, and you're less upset about that than you are, I'm sorry, about one guy getting killed horribly by the police. It was horrible, but still, that just shows a totally warped sense of moral priorities, and I think they deserve all the crap that they're getting.
Yeah, for sure. And not to mention, George Floyd's death was an outlier, and also there was no nuanced coverage of it whatsoever to include all of the immense drugs that were in his system. You weren't even allowed to talk about that. But what actually happened in Israel is a real phenomenon with a people who are under constant threat from their neighbors in the Middle East of destruction. So, I mean, a very real thing. I guess when it's fake, it's easier to jump in, but when it's real, you have to hold back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think that they need, I don't think they need to take sides on the broader conflict, really, if they don't want to. But if you're gonna get into the business of issuing these statements, you kind of have to do it for everything. And look, I mean, I hope that they stop maybe altogether after this, but I'm not holding my breath.
Aaron Sibarium, what's interesting to me is that it seems like that there's this anti-Israeli and perhaps more specifically anti-Jewish sentiment that exists in a far more widespread way than most of us would expect. Like it seems like a layup to come out with a statement if you're doing these statements, to come out with a statement that says we oppose terrorism, we stand with Israel.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and look, they don't, if they're really worried that they have some employees who have family in the Gaza Strip or in Lebanon and they don't want to offend those employees, there's a way you can issue the statement that unequivocally condemns terrorism and Hamas and expresses sympathy, but doesn't, you don't have to go like full throated, and also destroy the entire Gaza Strip. Like no one's asking corporations to do that, right? And I don't think anyone expects Harvard to do that either. But it's really not hard to just say mass terrorism against civilians of any kind, wrong. Really, really not hard to say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a range of people, including very far left people who are critical of Israel, who have nonetheless managed to say that. So if you can't even say that, I mean, and if someone's going to be offended by you saying that, I mean, that's it's hard for me to see how taking offense at the statement killing innocent Israeli civilians is wrong is anything other than anti-Semitic.
Right. So, but this is something that you have detected in not just Deutsche Bank, a German bank, but also throughout American corporations as well. This hesitancy to wade in on what should be a very easy one, which is we oppose terrorism, we stand with Israel.
Yeah. No. Exactly. I mean, Disney late last night, after I contacted them for comment, did eventually come out with a statement. But it took Disney a while, even though Disney has been, Exhibit A for woke corporations that just weigh in on every imaginable thing.
Totally.
I guess seems like they were more worried about banning third graders from learning about gender identity in schools than they were about a mass terrorist attack.
Yes.
And then look, I mean, some places have come out with decent statements, and that's great. I'm not trying to say that it's the entirety of corporate America, but General Motors, I think Apple, Target, IKEA, all of these places really went all in on BLM and Ukraine, and they've been pretty silent about this.
Well, and especially now that we have all of the evidence about what Black Lives Matter as an organization and a movement was actually about. First of all, the self-dealing was immense. All of the donated resources, including from those corporations, went to buying ridiculous things like mansions in multiple countries just for a select group of people. And then, of course, the Black Lives Matter chapter support across the country this week for Hamas. You had BLM chapters, as you know, Aaron, releasing statements supporting Hamas and featuring imagery of the terrorists attacking Israel.
Yeah, I think it used to be kind of a right-wing joke or kind of edgelording thing to say Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization, and then, mainstream liberals would roll their eyes and be like, oh, of course, that's absurd.
Yeah.
But now the national organization has, in fact, refused to condemn one of its chapters putting out a statement outright endorsing terrorism. So, I will say one of the silver linings of this truly horrible series of events is that I think it is making Black Lives Matter toxic and associating it with terrorists. And, Black Lives Matter, I think, did do a lot of damage in 2020 with its militant anti-police stance. So if that ends up being discredited by this, I'm not going to be losing any sleep.
Right. Well, remember, there was also the 2016 shooting of a number of Dallas police officers. This is well before George Floyd's death, where a 25-year-old man associated with Black Lives Matter goes out and starts shooting cops on the streets. They were associated. They tried to distance themselves from that, but that was a terrorist attack right here in our country against police officers under the banner of Black Lives Matter. And the corporations all brushed past that. They just whitewashed it. They pretend like it never happened, and then they gave massive amounts of money, and they wrote the name of this organization all over their merchandise.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. I agree completely. It's one of the only positive things here is that I think there's going to be a broader reckoning with how far the mainstream kind of let really radical leftist, in some cases genocidal leftist ideology into their institution. And look, that's long overdue, and it's a shame that it's taken a terrorist attack to do it. But I hope that there is at least a little bit more scrutiny now before these corporations decide to give $500,000, as Coca-Cola did, to a fashionable lefty cause.
Yeah. So, Aaron, I guess underneath all of this, the reason this is so distressing is because, I think for a lot of us, we kind of think that there are plenty of Americans out there who share our values, who love the country, who want to stand up for decency. And then when you see just such rampant endorsement of evil, all over the place, you start to recognize, like, man, something has definitely gone wrong, whether it's the capture of higher education, the advancement of sort of Marxist propaganda in that environment, the out of control border situation, the idea that assimilation itself is somehow a sin, that you're not allowed to encourage people to assimilate into our country and what we believe. It very much feels like our very national existence is on the line.
Yeah, and it's funny. My reaction the past few days, I almost find the morality of the campus stuff less complicated than the morality of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I can understand why people in the Middle East are, get angry at Israel. It doesn't mean it's justified, but like there's a lot of history there. I get why there are divergent opinions, but for people on campuses in the United States to be just outright endorsing terrorism, that I think is just far more disturbing. And I don't. I think it's really just impossible to both sides of that. There are some isolated incidents of Jewish people in New York City saying some bad stuff where they're like, kill all Palestinians. It's like one video. Okay, that. But I'm not seeing that at scale, right? Whereas it does seem like there's a real kind of eliminationist rhetoric on left-wing campuses right now. And it's just, even if you don't like everything that the pro-Israel students say, there's just not the same level of outright celebration at death. I mean, I don't see anyone, I could be wrong, but I don't see anyone donning an Israeli flag and being like, yeah, isn't it great that, there were, 1,000, like civilians, caught in the crossfire when they bombed the hospital to get at Hamas. Isn't it great that all those people, no one's doing that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not seeing that anywhere.
And my guess is
not to say it doesn't exist.
And Aaron, my guess is a lot of the students you're talking about are the very people who would put Ukrainian flags in their bios and maybe even stage a "We Stand with Ukraine" rally. And here they are rooting on terrorism. It's completely incoherent.
Yeah, and then there's this stupid, cynical line where they're like, oh, well, you support Ukraine, but why don't you support the Palestinian resistance against an occupying power? I mean, well, because, Ukraine... when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, it had not just gone and butchered, 1,300 innocent civilians in Moscow. Like, it's a bit of a difference, right? I don't understand how stupid you have to be to make these comparisons.
Yeah, there's a lot of that out there. Aaron Sibarium, thank you very much from the great Washington Free Beacon. Always nice to talk to you, sir. Thank you.